Hi, so during this video, we're going to talk about the how to homeschool school communication. So how can you improve homeschool communication? Teachers, this is really for you. How can you easily in your day have better communication with your parents and with the parents of the students in your classroom? So there are there are three major categories that I'm going to talk about in this video. The first is Facebook or social media apps like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. The next are common applications or apps on phones. So we'll talk about those phone apps and how those might be helpful or useful for you. And the last thing we'll talk about is a hard copy traditional newsletter for those of you guys that prefer not to use technology. So one thing that is very helpful are those Facebook pages. A Facebook page can be created, not a personal Facebook page, but for the class. You can have a private group, so I would encourage making this group private. That way other parents or other individuals in the country or the state can't see what's happening in your classroom, but you can individually invite parents of the students in your class. One of the limitations to using a social media platform like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, something like that, is that not all parents use social media or are familiar or comfortable with social media. Most parents use Facebook. That's probably the most widely used app. Instagram probably closely follows that. And so when you're looking at this, you may want to look at what platforms will the majority of the teachers in my class or the majority of the parents in my class use. So Facebook is one of those. One of the disadvantages to it, like I said, is privacy. So you want to make sure that when you set this up, that you set up your privacy settings so that you can communicate to a select group, but not a wide range group. And the next thing that you want to consider in Facebook is Facebook doesn't necessarily allow for individual communication. You can use Facebook Messenger for that individual communication. So then within your Facebook page, you can easily connect to a parent in Facebook Messenger, just like you would text messaging. The benefit to this is that parents aren't going to necessarily know your cell phone number. However, the limitation of this, and you want to talk to your school superintendent or to your principal or administrators, is about FERPA and is this privacy concern if you're doing Facebook Messenger messages, okay? So it's not as secure as your email would be, okay? But the great thing about a Facebook page is it's a great platform to give announcements for the class. Here's what's happening tomorrow. Don't forget, tomorrow is PJ Day, or don't forget, tomorrow we're doing our class-wide screenings or the spelling test tomorrow. It's great for saying, here's our spelling list for this week. So those are all excellent ways to utilize a Facebook page. You can have a wish list. So let's say maybe you have a craft activity coming up and you need small toilet paper rolls or small paper towel rolls. It's a great way to ask for those things, milk jugs that maybe you need for a classroom activity. And you can get a lot of donations that way to your classroom. So Facebook is great for general communication. It gives parents, it's also a good way to post pictures of whole class activities or events that are happening in the class. Again, just check on that FERPA and Privacy Act, okay? So the next thing we're going to talk about are class apps. So I'm highlighting a couple of specific class apps. However, there are a lot of apps out there, so you can look through your app store. Some common ones are Talking Points. Talking Points is great because it can be multilingual. And so that means you can maybe have increased homeschool communication with some of those parents that are not fluent in the language that you use, or maybe need additional support in their language. Another one is Class Dojo. And so a lot of people use Class Dojo. It's great because it gives performance feedback on academic measures. And so that's where you really see that improvement in testing scores and grades. Other popular ones are Remind or Classting. And Classting is spelled Classting, okay? So those are great apps. They're good because they allow for general communication, but they also allow for you to have more specific messages going back and forth between you and the student. So you can kind of do both of those things that you would do in Facebook, but it's more secure than Facebook would be. The disadvantage to this and the things you want to consider are if you have a parent who has students in multiple classes, so maybe they have a kindergartner, a second grader, and a Sixth grader. If every teacher is using a different app, then that parent has to manage all three of those different apps. So you may want to, as a school or as a district, look into a preferred app that a majority of teachers are using. So maybe some use something different, but a preferred app for the district. There are some district-wide apps that a whole school could invest in that maybe cost money for the district, and that would be great if your district has that funding. But if not, there are a lot of free apps out there and available that will help with this. The last thing that you can do is a hard copy newsletter. And so that's just creating a newsletter. You can use things like Microsoft Word for that newsletter. It doesn't have to be fancy. It doesn't have to be sophisticated or pretty. It's just a way of communicating with the teachers. The advantage, again, is that it increases that communication and you can send it home every Friday. The disadvantage is that every Friday you have to create that homeschool communication note. And so sometimes it becomes a time issue, whereas some of the social media things, they're quick and easy. You don't have to worry about creating it, printing it, and putting it in each individual folder. The other disadvantage to a hard copy newsletter is all parents might not read it, whereas we're kind of glued to our phones, so you're more likely to see something that's on your phone. I hope you find one of these platforms to be useful and gives you some ideas on some advantages and disadvantages to adding one of these to your homeschool communication.